The webinar. There you go. Good afternoon. My name is Andrei Marcu, and I'm the director of the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. I want to welcome you all for a discussion on the macroeconomic implication of the 2040 EU climate change target. It's a discussion about economic implications. We're not here to get into a deep political or to discuss the process that's ongoing on. I think that we're all fascinated by the process that is now developing, and the council that will take place and the head of state meeting will take place. But let's try and stay away from that if possible. We have an excellent panel of interveners today that will give us their perspective, and there are eminent, very well-known economists. Professor Carlo Carraro, who is a professor of environmental economics at the University of Venice. Clemens Fuest, who is the president of the IFO Institute for Economic Research and the director of Center for Economic Studies at the University of Munich. Christian Gaudier, the director of Toulouse School of Economics. And last but not least, Terhi Lehtonen, who is a member of the cabinet of the executive vice president for a clean, just, and comprehensive transition, Teresa Ribera. I think that we have 3 out of our 4 speakers. We are waiting for our 4th speaker, Clemens Fuest. I'm not sure what is retaining Clemens, but he will be here. Michael, I'll pass on the floor to you while we wait a little bit for Clemens.
Of course, thank you, Andrei. And I see the number of attendees is also still surging slowly upwards. So just like in the old days during the pandemic, right, when we were learning how these webinars work. A few maybe just observations. You know, I witness a lot of what's happening in Brussels from outside the EU, from Washington, D.C. And years ago, I would have said, you know, the EU proposing a target like this is an absolutely important bellwether for the rest of the world to see whether a very advanced economy can decarbonize so rapidly and do so successfully. But with this administration, you've probably gotten used to having several very senior policymakers in the US use the EU as a punching ball. They no longer doubt that the EU will be ambitious. And I think the EU has sufficient proof of that. The question is now whether they are right, that the EU is doing this and declining very rapidly, right? They keep blaming decarbonization for all of Europe's ills. So I think ambition is no longer the question. It's rather the consequences or impacts, unintended consequences, if you like, of the ambition that others will be looking at. And I think outside of the US, for the rest of the world, that's the important question. Can we decarbonize without sacrificing other important social, economic, etc. objectives? So I think that's one of the big topics we're discussing today. And of course, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Very well. Look, just as a way of my introductory remarks, and again, people are streaming in. It seems to be taking time for people to stream in, but you all know that on July 2nd of this year, the Commission has put forward 2 documents whose provisions are include. One of them is the communication on the delivery of the Clean Industrial Deal. The other one is the update of the European climate law. And that European climate law puts forward a 90% reduction by 2040. That is not something that is for the faint of heart. This is a very serious target. And we, as hosts today, we have a very long name and very unyielding name, the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. This is not an easy name to remember. But we have the name to sustainable transition because we have been preoccupied from the very beginning when we established this organization about the sustainability of the transition. I come, maybe dating myself, I come from Rio 92 and sustainable development, and sustainable development implies economic, social, and environmental axes move in harmony. And if something gets out of front of the other ones, usually the transition is not sustainable. So we were always very concerned about sustainability. The documents that we have mentioned are very stimulating and provide stakeholders a much needed starting point for discussion and this can contain many provisions that are moving in the right direction. However, there needs to be a very deep debate, because what we are doing here, it is not only talking about the climate target, we're talking about changing European society. We're talking about the changing of direction. We're thinking about going from a century or more of basically carbon-fueled growth to a totally different economy. And that is something that we really must get right. We have to move, but we have to get it right. And the failure is not a choice, as some of you will say. I will now pass it on for initial intervention. The way we'll proceed, we'll have about 7-minute intervention, give or take, from the 4 speakers. We hope that Clemens will emerge at some point. But first is Carlo Carraro, then Clemens, Christian Goulier, and Terhi Lehtonen. So Carlo, you start first. Meanwhile, we will agitate and try and find Clemens.
Okay. Thank you, Andrei. Thank you very much for this invitation, the possibility to speak to a large audience about such an important topic. I'll start with given them the first. I'll start from the macro analysis, and I'll start by focusing on the feasibility of the minus 90% target. The report of the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, it's a nice board. It's chaired by Ottmar Dönhofer. There are a lot of nice colleagues, good colleagues in this board, and they spend a lot of time on the feasibility of the target. But I have some questions and criticism on this feasibility, because what they do is to start from a business as usual scenario, or let's say a trend scenario, which is quite optimistic, because they say in 2030, the emissions in Europe will be minus 54% with respect to 1990, and minus 78% in 2040 with existing measures, without any additional measure. And they want to increase the effort from this kind of linear reduction. They want to move to an enhanced reduction equal to minus 90%. And this would be a sort of, say, 12% increase with respect to the linear tendency of emission reduction. In reality, this is not the case. There are many other projections that say that, including the European Environmental Agency, that says that the EU emissions in 2040 will be 68%, not 78%. So the additional effort will be 22% and not 12%. And this additional effort is what determines the cost, and we will talk about the cost in a minute. So, and the cost is obviously much higher if the additional effort is 22% of emission reduction rather than 12%. This is about the level of the ambition, but also how can the ambition be achieved is also critical, because in the report they say in the 90% scenario, emissions will increase. Emission reduction will increase to 90% with respect to 78%. The annual capture in the linear scenario is 90 million tons of CO2. It will become 220 million tons of CO2 in the 90% scenario. So most of the more ambitious scenario, most of the additional emission reductions are achieved through carbon capture and carbon removal. And these two technologies are not yet available, and they are really costly. Today, they are certainly costly. And the recent EASA study published in Nature says that we don't even have the space, the storage location, to make this increase in carbon capture and storage feasible. So I have some problems with the feasibility of the target. And the cost of CCS and CDR will remain high even in the coming years. It's unlikely to decrease in the next decade. So how can we make these CCS and CDR more competitive? Certainly, the ETS price is crucial. and we will need a higher price for these two technology to be competitive. But there is a sort of trade-off between short-term and long-term efficiency. On the short term, we would like ETS market to be more efficient. We would like to have more international credits, for example. The issue of international credits is very important. We would like to have more. But if we have more international credits, the price will be lower, and we will have less CCS and CDR. So there is this trade-off that it's quite difficult to manage. And other obstacles to the feasibility of the target are the well-known lack of storage of electricity, the tariffs on China's green technology, and in a policy environment which is delaying action also in Europe. So summing up all these effects, I would conclude that the assessment of the European advisory board relies on two technologies. The additional effort relies on two technologies that are likely to be available and or competitive by 2040. And of course, let's move to the cost of what Michael was saying. The cost in this assessment report are low. Again, I quote the report. The linear reduction option, the option of linear reduction shows a slight positive deviation of 0.5% compared to the 90% option, only 0.5% in 2040, which is nothing. Yearly is really nothing. And in addition, the report says by 2050, there is no difference in GDP levels across scenario as the impacts are transitory. So again, this conclusion cost of this additional effort, the macroeconomic cost of the additional effort is going to be low, relies on the availability of technologies that are not yet available, and relies on a benchmark, on a business as usual, which is too optimistic with respect to what is actually undergoing. So I think that the costs are going to be higher than what are estimated by the European Commission. And there are other reasons why costs are going to be higher. The report doesn't take properly into account transition risk and distributional effects. And we know that most of it will not be macro costs, it will be distributional costs. It will be transition costs in some sectors that are penalized by the transition, whereas other sectors will benefit from this transition. And this redistribution across sector and redistribution across households are those that make this target difficult to assess, and the cost of the target difficult to quantify. Finally, the question would be, but nevertheless, this target is welfare enhancing. Yes, of course, this target is welfare enhancing if we take into account the lower damages from lower emissions, and also some additional intangible benefits like security and health that are not calculated in the assessment of the European Commission. But the benefits of the lower emission reduction, which are crucial for this 90% target of welfare enhancing, these additional benefits come only if the net zero strategy is implemented globally. If all countries coordinate their own actions and actually reduce emissions. So we need international cooperation, we need a strategy to move other countries into the right direction. And this is not yet the case, and even worse. I mean, the situation is getting worse and worse. Even the linear target, the minus 80% target, is welfare enhancing, both. I mean, so the choice between a target that implies an additional effort, the 90%, or the linear one, the 78, 80% target. The choice between the two is not based on economic analysis, not based on economic reasons. It's an ethical one, and it's fairness and social responsibility, and the report is very clear about this. The fairness they are talking about is the one with respect to the other countries, because the EU and US are the largest contributors to the stock of emissions, the largest contributors to cumulative emissions. And this kind of responsibility is the one that drives the Commission to choose the minus 90% target. Certainly, it's not an economic decision. It's really a political and ethical decision.
So, okay, Carlo, lots of questions, notes and questions that pop in my mind when I listen to you. Clemens, just in time. Good to see you. Are you ready now, or you want to, because you just came in, are you okay to go now because you're next to bat, as they say in America?
Yeah, sorry for being a little late here. Yeah, I can say a few words about this. I can start off, although I'm of course very interested in what everybody has to say, but maybe a few points about this objective and this entire debate. So maybe the first point is, GDP is not everything. It could even be nothing. Or almost nothing, if we think about this transition and what's really required. So if we understand the transition towards carbon neutrality as something where we need to invest a lot and do a kind of investment that replaces an existing capital stock rather than creating additional production capacity, we should be more interested in the implications for consumption. And that's actually what people are interested in and what welfare is about. So we are facing a situation where we still have a large capital stock that becomes obsolete. And we are making, or are expected to make, huge efforts to replace this capital stock. This will, the impact will be very much that of a negative supply shock. So we need to replace a lot of capital stock. And if you do that, it's a bit like, you tear down your house and you build it up again. You've produced a lot of GDP because the cost enters GDP, but your consumption is suddenly very low because you need a lot of resources to build up this capital. So I think a key issue is, what happens to consumption, and are people willing to make the sacrifice in terms of consumption? It's true. I mean, if it's possible to develop the technologies and to create a capital stock that leads to carbon neutrality, once you've done that, it's great. But the transition can be quite painful. And the transition will be one for decades. If I look at my own country, at Germany, and ask, what is the share of overall energy supply that is decarbonized, the answer is it's 22%. And it's taken us 3.5 decades to get there. And now, we want to accelerate this. So that's a huge effort. I guess technically it's possible, but economically the question is, how can you really do that without massive and unacceptable sacrifices in terms of consumption in the transition? And the other issue, I guess, is we need to bear in mind that the context has changed. So we live in a world where suddenly we will need, maybe 3% of GDP to invest in defense. Is this, does this affect our ability to invest into decarbonization? I'm afraid yes. We know we need to invest a lot in adjustment to global warming. Global warming is coming irrespective of what the Europeans do. So we will need to invest massively into adjustment, protection against flooding. We are living in an aging society, so we will need to invest heavily into structural change towards healthcare and these things. So we are talking about this transition in the presence of a number of other pressures. And the question is, how can we deal with that? I guess, any benign macroeconomic scenarios relies on companies and governments investing a lot. What we're seeing at the moment, again, in my own country, in Germany, is investment is collapsing. Real investment today in Germany, real private investment, is at the level of 2015, 10 years ago. So it's been declining for many years. The expectation was, or the hope was, that with decarbonization, companies would invest more. And indeed, during the transition, we need higher levels of investment. So what we are seeing is lower levels of investment. So, so I'm not sure whether the message of the impact assessment, it's not a problem. The impact on GDP is minimal. Whether that's a very credible message, I'm skeptical.
And you also open, as the lawyers would say, Clemens, the door to many questions that come after that. But before I do that, I'll go to Christian Goulier.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I think it's an important issue that we need to discuss, and I'm happy to hear that Carlo and Clemens are mostly aligned together. And I'm sorry, I will probably repeat a similar message. So first, I say, and I'm not a macroeconomist. I'm more a microeconomist and climate economist. So it's important to start with the cost. I mean, we have been living over the last 2 decades, I would say, in a world where politicians have defended the idea that transiting to a decarbonized economy would be good for the environment and good for the people. This reality is virtual. In the sense that, well, indeed, we have been able to eliminate the low-hanging fruits of the decarbonization, but now things become harder. Think about steel production. If you want to use hydrogen rather than coal to produce steel, you probably double the cost of producing steel. You double it, okay? Doubling the cost of producing steel with the decarbonized technology. Look at airline industry, replacing standard kerosene from oil by synthetic kerosene using hydrogen and produced by green electricity. You multiply the cost of this by a factor somewhere between 5 and 10. Let us go to discomfort. Reducing heat in your apartment during the winter is not liked by the people, okay? Forcing people to use public transportation and private system like private car is not an easy thing to induce people to do. Retrofitting apartment. Economists have spent now some energy in order to estimate the cost per ton of CO2 saved of that kind of investment, and you see that it's very costly per ton of CO2 saved. What we have in front of us to decarbonize our economy is not an easy task. And that generates a social acceptability problem. Indeed, it's true that many of those costs are smaller than the cost of inaction that is measured by the social cost of carbon. And let us look at that. The most recent public estimation of the social cost of carbon under the Biden administration Environmental Protection Agency report produced at the end of 2023 said that the social cost of carbon should be around $220 per ton of CO2. That is, when you emit 1 ton of CO2, it will generate a damage that is around $220 per ton of CO2 saved. So per ton of CO2 generated, I mean. Of course, this means that it's normatively, it's socially desirable for humanity, for everyone to implement all possible decarbonization action that cost us less than this amount, $220 per ton of CO2. This is not what we do. And if we would do that, indeed, we would probably be close to a decarbonization effort around 40, 45%, 50% today. The question is not there for this webinar. The question is, what would be the objective for 2040? Okay, in 2040, the EPA estimation would be that the social cost of carbon would be around $270 per ton of CO2 saved, and with the meaning that from the point of view of humanity and humanity welfare, we should implement by the year 2040 all action that cost us $270 per ton of CO2. So does it can it be translated into a 90% reduction? I'm not sure. So let us look at that. Let us look at what has been the estimation of the cost of decarbonization by the year 2040. There has been different estimation about that made by the IPCC. For France, we have a Kiné report of 2023 that says that by the year 2040, to attain that objective around 85 or 90% reduction, we should implement all action that costed less than 400 euros per ton of CO2 saved. So you see that indeed we have a problem with the objective. We have a normative problem that maybe this objective is too ambitious. The cost to get there may be too large with respect to the benefits of going there. That's of course surrounded by a lot of uncertainty about what will be the cost, what will be the available technology by the year 2040, and that's why probably I would prefer a price target rather than a quantity target. That has been a long discussion among economists about this difference between the two kind of target, price versus quantity. So, but also more deeply, I would like to stress the fact that this will probably not be socially acceptable. So we have a credibility issue. If we have not been able today to attain the objective, the European objective, what will be the social acceptability where we will have to multiply the carbon price in Europe by a factor 3, 4, or 5 to attain this objective in a context, in a geopolitical context that clearly goes against implementing that kind of ambition. What will happen with the European citizen if they realize that Europe is the only region in the world that really asks sacrifice to the people in the current context, in particular with the United States getting out of the Paris Agreement? We have a credibility issue here. And as said before, I think by Carlo, we have a trade-off between credibility and ambition in the context where social acceptability problem is strong. So to get it short, normatively, it may be possible that 90% is the right objective with respect to the common good. Maybe it's a little bit too large. It will depend upon what will be the technology available by the year 2040. But in a more positive perspective, it is not clear that this ambition, 90% reduction, is socially acceptable, and therefore there is a deep difficulty here for Europe. How can we implement a target which is not credible? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. I always like to say that the Commission has the last word, but not in this case. They will have this last word in this round because there will be further rounds. But Terhi, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Andre. A target that is not credible. I wouldn't sign up for that. I just would want to come back briefly to the question is why are we setting the target for 2040 and why are we accelerating the climate action? While the macroeconomic impacts of climate change itself is not the topic of today, it is important to remind ourselves that the cost of inaction is very high, as it was already mentioned. And in the Commission's impact assessment for 2040, the Commission made a very conservative estimate that the cost of inaction is increasing and it will be reaching 7% of the GDP by the end of century. And the more recent estimates are much higher. And we know that the remaining global carbon budget is declining very fast, increasing the risk of reaching irreversible tipping points in the climate system, which will potentially have catastrophic consequences for people and for ecosystems. So that it is essential to accelerate action to avoid these consequences. The climate law, as you know, adopted in 2021, set the targets for 2030 and for climate neutrality at the latest by 2050. And it requires the Commission to put forward a proposal for an intermediate 2040 target to set the pace for EU-wide reductions of net greenhouse gas emissions. And and we are largely on track to meet 2030 targets according to the Commission's assessment. The setting of the target for 2040 will provide investors and EU business with predictability and clear indication of the direction of travel to drive the business decisions and private investments, and it is to avoid those, avoid any obsolete investments that was also mentioned, that we don't want these at least in the future. We also need to set our target for 2040 to be able to provide for our next NDC under the Paris Agreement. The EU has always derived our international commitment from the targets set in international policies. And of course, it's in order to tackle climate change, it is absolutely necessary that we get the rest of the world to act as well. And it's by leading by example, it seems that we are the most credible. So why then the 90%? Taking into account the scientific advice by the European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change, and based on the detailed impact assessment, a 90% target provides the greatest overall benefits in terms of competitiveness, resilience, independence, autonomy, a just transition, and it ensures that EU meets its commitments under the Paris Agreement to pursue limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. Now, on the investment level of investment needs in the energy system for 90%. In the Commission's impact assessment, all options assessed by the Commission require similar level of investment over 2031 to 2050. The average annual energy system investment needs amount to 1.5 trillion, or this is including transport, or 660 billion excluding transport for the period 2031 to 2050. These are not additional cost, additional investment levels for decarbonization. The resources would also, in the absence of climate action, need to be invested in order to provide for the economy's energy needs. Now, the 90 to 95 domestic trajectory would bring some of these investments forward to the 2030s, and then lower the cost over the second half of the trajectory after 2030. Now, for the energy system beyond transport, this means 3.2% of GDP per annum. This is 1.5% more than the level of investment in the previous decade, 2010 to 2020, which you can consider was a relatively low investment in energy system. For the transport, the yearly spending are estimated at about 870 billion. This is equivalent to 4.2% of GDP, but this is similar to similar proportion of GDP as in the period 2011 to 2020. So taking out of context, the 1.5 trillion total investment gives an overestimate, or it feels a bit of an overestimate to the extent that the investment is required for the transition per se. As noted, the investment in transport is almost 2/3 of the figure. It is very similar to the historical levels of investment or consumption or cost for the sector, and a significant share of the investment represents the replacement of private vehicles, which would need to be replaced under any circumstance given the economic lifetime of cars. Now, as far as the investment needs in the energy system, beyond transport, then the transition to climate neutrality does indeed require an increment in investment levels, both in absolute levels and as a share of GDP. And that additional effort should not be underestimated, and it will require a mobilization of all funding instruments for decarbonizing the energy system. Now, there are many sectors which are not affected by the transition, or are even more affected by the climate impact. However, there are sectors where the green transition has a big impact, and accompanying measures, enablers, are necessary. And some of these sectors may not all be large in terms of GDP, but they might be critical or strategic otherwise. And therefore, in implementing the green the Clean Industrial Deal, the Commission seeks to provide the key enabling conditions that are needed for some of these sectors to transition, including new lead markets to support the clean production. We have put forward the Clean Industrial State Aid Framework to facilitate support to the transition. There are policies such as Social Climate Fund, Just Transition Fund in place to accompany the transition. Also, carbon pricing will provide resources to support the transition. So I think I completely agree with the previous speaker in noting that there are cost to some segments. Now, if we wait, if we hesitate and wait for all solutions to be available, I think there are a lot of technological solutions already available. If we wait for everything to be available, somebody else will have found them and taken the market. Now, at the macroeconomic level, the projected increase in investment needs as a share of GDP 1.5% compared to the levels of last decade, which was with low investment, would not bring the share of investment to unusual levels relative to the GDP. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, investments as a share of GDP was more around 25% than the current 20 to 21%. And for reference, for China, investments to GDP is beyond 40%, also for Japan above 25%. And Andre, I would like to conclude that on the thought that even if we're not doing this for climate protection, and I think we should, to provide the leadership so sorely needed globally, we might be wise to pursue decarbonization from economic growth and economic security perspective, shifting away from imported oil and gas to gain economic security and to reap the potential for climate investments to reignite and revitalize the EU economy. And it seems that this has been the Chinese strategy, and it is now outcompeting EU in most clean tech. 10% of Chinese GDP, quarter of GDP growth is now clean energy and clean tech, while Chinese export of clean tech has tripled in last 5 years. So I leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Terhi. Michael, why don't you start?
All right, thank you. Also from my side to all panelists, fascinating inputs. And, you know, I'll maybe pick up from where Terhi just left off and ask this to Clemens. Clemens, we're both Germans, and our former chancellor, he ran, you know, with a lot of rhetoric about how transitioning to the green economy would bring an economic boom in jobs as well. In fact, the Biden administration, very similar rhetoric. Now, of course, I'm exposed every day to sort of a very different narrative. Net zero is a train wreck. It leads to economic decline, etc. So my question to you, are there conditions and policy mixes under which you could see a 90% pathway to be growth enhancing, despite your earlier remarks, rather than just a drag on the transition? And how does this growth, how is it distributed? So is this sort of evenly distributed, or is it very unevenly? Just curious on your thoughts on that, precisely on the economic rationale for decarbonization.
You want me to answer directly?
Yes, please go ahead. We'll round or two with you.
Yes.
Directly and frankly.
Okay, thank you. Now, maybe first of all, one remark about the macroeconomic damage of climate change. Yes, that's true. That's why Christian said protecting the climate is welfare enhancing for humanity. That's right. The trouble is the macroeconomic damage of climate change will be probably unrelated to European efforts for climate change. These are just two different things, simply because the rest of the world will not be led by Europe. I mean, I guess that's a key issue for debate also. If you think that because the Europeans decarbonize, everybody else will decarbonize, then it's completely right. Then you should say, okay, the return is slowing down global warming. But, I don't think anybody believes that, especially not the investors we are waiting for. It's not happening. We see this. The US is currently moving into the opposite direction. And this idea of European leadership is just not credible. That's one of the issues here. Now, about the investment, if we imagine a transition where we only could just replace capital, which is written off anyway. So cars are getting old, should we buy a new combustion engine car, or should we buy maybe an electric car if, electricity production is decarbonized? If that was a smooth transition with no capital being written off, that would be fine. And if the new capital was as efficient as the old capital, so an ideal scenario, then we wouldn't have this effect that we need to cut down consumption and invest more and make a big effort, replacing, the tearing down your house and building it up again. A metaphor would be misleading. But I think that's what the impact assessment shows. We will need to get that transition. We will need maybe 2 percentage points of investment more. And if we imagine that, how can you get to that? You need to reduce consumption by 3% roughly. If you want to generate these 2% you use for the investment, to build up this new capital stock. And if you tell people, sorry, we have to cut your incomes or your consumption by 3%, will people like that? I think it's very difficult as an economist to say, it is right or wrong to do that. It's just an economic decision. But I think what's not credible is telling people, it's a gain, these words by Olaf Scholz, it's going to create a big economic boom. That's really misleading. There is no evidence that, a stringent climate policy leads to big innovations that raise productivity and so on. It's an illusion. If we look at the products that are out there, electric cars, the Chinese are doing it. Solar panels, all these goods you need for the transition. The Chinese are doing this because this is mass production. What the Europeans are good at is, more products where scale is not so important. If you look at the German export sector, they are building complex machinery that is very individualized. At least if you look at the successful startups in Europe, they are not green startups. The most successful startup in Germany, it has something to do with data mining, but it's completely unrelated to the green economy. So this idea that the restrictive climate policy would generate innovation and that will lead to a huge increase in productivity, boost exports, it's just not credible. There is some data saying yes. Green technologies do play an important role, but we see that there is, nothing inside anything resembling to a boom driven by green energies. It's, it's a nice story, but the evidence is not there. Still, I think it's thinkable at least that if we focus on capital, we need to write off anyway. I think we should really watch out for possibilities to get this transition at a low price. So capital that is written off anyway shouldn't be replaced by, let's call it fossil capital, but we should watch out for possibilities to really build up the decarbonized capital stock where it's possible. But there are so many unknowns. Do we really have the technologies? We have this famous case of the subsidies programs in Germany where companies have been invited to engage in green steel production. And most companies have said, no, thank you very much. Even if you give us 2 billion, we're not building the factory because there is no perspective for this being a business model. It's just too far away. And I guess that's again related to the credibility question. Does anybody think the world is moving towards carbon neutrality? Apparently not. At least these companies aren't, don't believe this story. So it's just not coming.
Christian, I want to come back to you first. You talked about the price and quantity. EU has made a decision a while ago, and I was a former CEO of AIDA, going for quantity, for a ETS type of model. Now, if you want to go for a price, and I understand the case you make is the social cost, and we're running ahead of the social cost that make economic sense or not. That's the way I understand it, at least. But how would you implement? I mean, is it implementable at this point to move with the system that we have now to move into a price model? How do you do that? Or we have to re-examine the model post 2030?
Andre, thank you very much for the question. Let me take 1 minute to complement what Clement just said. I fully agree with him. Let us see what happened over the last few years in Europe, particularly in France. Most of those green technologies are not profitable for firms without a carbon pricing mechanism. And that's related to your question. So because we got the Yellow Vest movement that was against pricing carbon, in fact, they were mostly not against carbon pricing. They were against sacrificing their purchasing power for the climate. What we did is we switched to carbon pricing, where we would ask effort from the people, where they would self-fund their own effort to reduce emission, incentivized by the carbon price. We moved to a system where the state replaced the consumers and the corporations to fund this transition. And we see the problem. We don't have money anymore, in France in particular. We have been downgraded by Fitch last Friday, and we clearly have a problem to fund those, to follow these climate policies where everything would be funded by the state. So we see here the end of a cycle where climate policies have been mostly funded by the state, and that's the end of the story. Now we have a backlash, both because we cannot fund those things anymore by the public purse, but also because people really understand now that there is a real cost for the transition. Transition equals sacrifices, and that's where the problem is. So to answer your question, Andre, we remember in 2005, supported by the US, we wanted to implement a market mechanism with a market for permits rather than imposing a carbon tax. Also because the carbon tax at the European Union level would be difficult to agree because of each country having a veto right on any fiscal policy at the level of the Union. Therefore, it was not possible to go into to implement the price mechanism. We went to a market mechanism that did not require unanimity among the members of the Union. And so we went to a quantity mechanism, and the consequence of that is clear today. I mean, we have no idea, and corporation investors have absolutely no idea of where will be the price of carbon in 2040 without any other climate policies to get to the target of 90% reduction. I mean, there is such a large, deep uncertainty about the technology that will be available or not to get there. I mean, Carlo was talking about the CCS technologies. I mean, the current estimation about what will be the cost per ton of CO2 saved of that technology lie between 50 euros to 5,000 euros per ton of CO2 saved, given the lack of storage capacity in Europe and things like that. So given this deep uncertainty about what will be the future price, we know at the macro level that uncertainty about the future economic context in the economy tends to reduce investment without clarity on what will be the penalties imposed to people who will not decarbonize their production technology. I mean, people prefer to delay their investment, and we are in that situation now. Who knows what will be the equivalent price on the ETS1 and ETS2 after 2027? What will be the equilibrium price on the ETS markets in Europe in order to achieve the desired outcome by the year 2040? It would be probably better to have a price mechanism, because in price mechanism we can impose guarantees, state guarantees about what will happen if the price is too low. We have a contract for difference and things like that, where and you see this in particular policies where investors get clarity on what will be the benefits and the cost of not implementing a decarbonization effort, this fixed price with in many countries in Europe, Spain, France, Germany, we implement a mechanism where the price of electricity renewable were fixed in advance for the next 20 years. And that was a huge success because there were no uncertainty for the next 20 years. With DETS, the uncertainty is deep, and therefore the impact on the transition is rather limited.
Michael.
Well, I think we've already we're diving into sort of policy choice, instrument choice discussions, even though it's a panel on economic questions. But Terhi, as a policymaker, both the senior policy official in the Finnish government and now, of course, at the very sort of Schalltable, as we say in Germany, so at the in the action on the European Green Deal and operationalizing all this, even if we didn't have a fundamental switch of instrument, as we were just discussing with Christian, there will be changes, right, to the instrument portfolio. And so the question to you would be, how does the Commission envision, the reviews of existing instruments, in what sequence, and might there be some more fundamental changes down the road after all, or is it all just incrementally adjusting and ratcheting up, so to speak, the stringency of the existing instrument portfolio? So really the policy side of things.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's early days. I think Andre said early in the beginning that we're not going to get into the discussions in the council or the parliament on the target, but I think we do need the target in order to be designing the policy, and it's too early to say how this is going to be. I think from judging from experience, I think carbon pricing is going to remain in the core of our policy mix. I think this I can safely say. I would also be, I think, relatively safe to say that pricing alone will not be also sufficient. So we will also need other policies, both at national and at members and at the European level. I don't think I would expect an absolute revolution, but that said, we are not there yet. I think also from the services perspective, it would seem to make sense to approach the policies as relatively like a package, as it has been done before, framed with the common impact assessment. But again, even that we will have to see. We will have to wait and see also. We know now that the leaders will be discussing this. So let's see if there is a guidance from that discussion and how to proceed from there.
Carlo, coming back, I mean, we've heard from both Clemens and Christian to some regarding the impact on consumption and the shift toward investment. What the impact assessment says more or less that there's not going to be an enormous impact. What's your reaction to that? Because there are assumptions behind this, and this is a serious matter. It's not only because we're called sustainable transition in our name, but this is the real world where we have elections ever so often. We had an election in North Rhine-Westphalia yesterday, which showed certain results, and there's a very unstable French government that who knows what's going to happen. There's a lot of political consideration, again, and not talking about kind of pontificating on what the politics may be, but in the end, there is the shift from consumption to investment. And is this as acute as some see it, or is this much more marginal as the impact assessment would see it? What's your reaction?
Well,
I was also a little bit maybe struck by the impact assessment that it's not as acute or it seems smaller, but at the same time, it's also I'm not an economist, so I'm always struck like how come a heat pump at my place is not an investment, but is a durable good. But if it's an industry that installs a heat pump, then it's an investment. And the transport costs are also not investments, and so forth. But I think there is it's hard to sometimes make the difference. But on the other hand, we know for sure that when we're buying fossil fuels, we're buying and we're burning it away. When we're buying solar panel or a heat pump and using electricity, we're investing be as a person, and then we are we're spending less in running that system while maintaining the same quality of life. And I think we need to have clever policy mixes to make sure that for our people there is that everybody benefits from this, that everybody can make this investment into the electric vehicle. That will be then creating more energy independence and be cheaper in the long run, but as an initial investment might be beyond some people's
Thank you, Terry. Actually, I was writing this at Carlos, so Carlos, I'm back
sorry,
to
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, this is a free-flow discussion.
Thank you, Andre. Very useful comments from Telly, and thank you. I think that we should not exaggerate on the other direction. We are a bit critical on the assessment by European Scientific Advisory Board, but without exaggerating the conclusion, because the story they tell, for example, is not the one that Clement told us about. They don't claim there will be an incredible economic growth thanks to the transition to renewables or other green technology. They say that the macroeconomic impact is limited. The difference between the macro economic effects in terms of economic growth, both in terms of GDP and in terms of consumption, with a 90% target is more or less the same. And by the way, it's more or less the same even with a 95% target, because they have a simulation of the 95% target, and they see that the difference between 80, 85, 90 or 95 is really small. That's the story. It's a small difference. So we should focus on other benefits, the benefits from the lower emission, lower damages from climate change, the security benefits, the health benefits, and so on. So including the political benefits from leading internationally the transition, which is crucially a global action, requires global action. In terms of investment, I think that the Draghi report is clear about it. Investments should double, and in the last 5 years, they tripled. We need to double investment. So the big change already occurred in the last 5 years. There will be another big change coming, but it's not that different from what happened in the past and what happened in other situations. So we can manage this kind of increase in investments with some attention to what Christian was saying, that national governments, in many cases, France is a nice example, don't have the resources to fund even these double investments that Draghi writes about in his report. So we need other sources of investments. And by the way, in the last, say, 10 years, OECD countries invested about half of the total amount of green investments from public resources. The other half was coming from private resources. So again, when measuring the needs from fiscal sources coming from countries, from public sources, we should not consider the whole amount, because half of it comes from private sources. Investments are required. The state aid regulation is not going to help, because most countries are not able to use it. They don't have the money to do it. And we need something more. The idea of European green bonds or something similar to what has been done for the pandemic could be used to support the missing investments, the ones that they cannot be covered by other sources. Finally, the cost of inaction. The cost of inaction is high, but again, the benefit coming to each country from reducing emissions depends on what happens in all the other countries. What I would have expected is not only a decision on a EU target, it's a decision on how to help the other countries reduce emissions, how to foster international cooperation, how to sustain something better than COPs that are not working, to deliver an international treaty to reduce emission, or actions in most countries to reduce emission. Again, this is missing. The EU is weak in its diplomacy. It's weak in its international relationship with developing countries, where in between the US and developing world, and we don't know what to do. We don't know which side to take. We're afraid to move closer to China rather than losing relationship with United States. So I think that the European Union should clarify its own ideas about what to do in terms of strategy, in particular policy strategy. Finally, do we really need a 90%? So, because what we are saying in terms of cost of inactions, in terms of investments, so on and so forth, applies to a 90% target, but also applies to an 85 or an 80% target. And I think that it will be much easier, and the report by the European Scientific Advisory Board is clear about it, will be much easier to achieve a minus 80% target than a minus 90% target, without losing any major environmental benefit.
Michael?
Okay, well, indulge me. I mean, being sort of the one that's located outside of Europe, this international dimension is, of course, extremely interesting to me. And Clemens was extremely negative in sort of suggesting that no matter what Europe will do, others will not follow. But I agree, it is true that the geopolitics have begun clouding what I think 5 to 10 years ago was still a clear leadership effect that had sort of spillover benefits politically on others. Carlo just reminded us that the international, sort of the conventional international multilateral diplomacy is very challenging currently. Let me turn maybe to Christian. I know that you've been working with other economists on an idea for a not universal, right, but more of a club-like architecture. Could this be a solution in which Europe can flex sort of leadership, but not trying to convince 198 countries and rather maybe just a handful of countries to follow? And can you say a little bit more about that idea? What's your take on that? Would that maybe help solve this dilemma that Clemens and Carlo were alluding to?
Before Christian, before I come to you, I'd like to also invite from now on the audience to raise their little electronic arms. So if they want to intervene, we'll come back to them. So apologies, Christian, go ahead.
No, thank you both of you, Andre and Michael. Yeah, there is an embargo on the document that we have been working on with colleagues from Harvard, MIT, people from India and China over the last few months. The embargo will be removed on this Thursday. But I can give you the flavor. I mean, first point, clearly, it will be absolutely not possible to get to such an ambitious target, 80, 85, 90% by the year 2040, if we don't solve the carbon leakage problem. The idea that if we decide to impose all the efforts to decarbonize that cost us less than 400 euros per ton of CO2 saved, the cost will be so enormous for the corporation and for the consumers that most of without a mechanism to control for that, most of the emission will move to other places on this planet with no benefits for humanity, for the climate, and a terrible economic cost for Europe. So we need, if we really want to get to this ambition, and of course, as we all said, normatively, probably we should go there, or maybe not 90%, but 80 or 85%. on a normative ground, it's socially desirable from the point of view of the common good of the planet. It's socially desirable. But if the outcome of our policy is just to move emission to other place on this planet, this is useless. So we really need, and I support Europe on this, we really need to put in place a strong and efficient carbon border adjustment mechanism that has the potential, at least, to fix the carbon leakage problem. So indeed, with colleagues, as you just mentioned, Michael, we will propose on Thursday a coalition of the willing that will, in my dream, assemble all countries except the US in a coalition where all those countries will come together, implementing a carbon price, probably heterogeneous, 100 euros for Europe and Canada and Japan and Australia and countries like that, 50 euros for developing, the economic tiger of the South, and 20 euros for the low developing countries, something like that. And in this agreement, the coalition will accept to impose a carbon border tax to the non-member, in my dream only the US, that will have to pay 100 euros per ton of CO2 for any good that would be exported to that coalition, to the remainder of the world. And that would probably induce the US to join the coalition and having something going back to unanimity in Europe. Whether we can do that or not, I don't know, but at least we need to try. We need to try something, because I'm sure that if the US remain outside this worldwide war against climate change, there will be no war at all.
Andre, you're muted for once.
Jan, do you want to introduce yourself? And are you still there? Yeah, you want to introduce yourself? The question, if you want. I'm sure there's going to be an initial comment, but let's cut it short. And there's a question directed to all of them. One of them, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Jan Nil. I work in the economic department of the European Commission. And so, of course, it's very timely to discuss macroeconomic impacts. If you allow, I would have 2 comments and 2 questions, but brief ones. On the 2 comments, very briefly, one comment, I think, on the very good point made on the private versus public funding by Carlo Carraro. Just to mention that this is not exogenous, of course, because carbon pricing, as the EU has strengthened as instrument and will extend in the next years, is of course increases the incentives to privately invest. So, and that reduces the need to do public subsidies. The second comment before the question is about very briefly on the very old question on carbon quantity versus prices made by Christian Goyer. Just to highlight, when we look at the reality of the EU ETS, we have also some of these elements in. The carbon contracts for difference can be done with an emissions trading system, if that is the question. There are, of course, countries try this. And on the other hand, I really want to see the government which can guarantee a 2040 carbon tax with yearly budgets of where tax levels are changed. Trading systems have been far more stable empirically than carbon tax levels. These are the comments, but the 2 questions to the panels would be, one, you have, of course, cited right examples of technologies which can be very expensive, but I have heard no one talking about the learning curve for batteries, which we have seen in the last years. So I think perhaps there's a need of balance, perhaps between, yes, about the problems and challenges of some technologies, but we have also seen empirically in the last years technological progress far beyond what has been expected ex ante. And I think it would be good to put this, or would ask the questions, how you would react to those from the economic side, because sometimes the model covered it, but often also not? And the second question is, there was a bold statement where someone said, I don't remember who, that it would be a positive statement that there is no social acceptability. And of course, I know the France Yellow Vest examples, and everyone in Europe knows it since 7 years. But could you please give other 3 positive examples for the problem of social acceptability, where it goes beyond the discourse analysis that it is a problem?
Yes, thank you, Jan. Now, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, there is also industry that would like to have a say in this. Cédric Demus first.
Thank you very much, André. A quick comment. My name is Cédric Demus. I work for Holcim Construction Materials Company, including cement. We're known as to be part of the hard-to-abate sector. I was a bit disturbed in hearing in this discussion that this transition that we're all talking about and in which we're invested in is just equal to restrictions and sacrifice. It's a bit shocking to hear that in this discussion, because for us, this transition is about the growth opportunity, a massive growth opportunity, not for the next 3 years, but for the next 50, 60, 70 years. And what we observe, at least in our sector, that companies in other parts of the world are moving very fast. Don't be mistaken, they are moving very fast in all parts of the world. And if we do not invest, innovate, and go through the hard transition that we're going through, we're going to lose yet another decade when the political winds are going to change yet again. So I don't understand why we shouldn't go for it. And of course, you know, we need a solid political policy and regulatory toolkit. And Christian mentioned CBAM. We need a solid, predictable, reliable carbon price. We need all of this, but we are in the midst of developing it. We're in the midst of development. So it's not about restrictions and sacrifice. It's about being bold, investing, getting the support from policymakers, showing us that it is doable and that we can develop reasonable business case. And of course, it's easier than staying with our hands in the pocket and do nothing. It's more difficult than doing that, but it's doable, and we're in the midst of doing this. So I would say the transition is nothing to do with sacrifice. It's about leveraging our current toolkit and creating growth opportunities. Thank you.
Very well, thank you very much, Cédric. Then I've got one last intervener, then we'll come back to the panel. Daniele Agostini from Enel.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. No, thank you, André and team, for organizing a very interesting debate. And thank you, Cédric, for also anticipating some of my reaction. Again, I had energy and climate policies in the ENA Group. The ENA Group operates in 30 countries around the world. In Europe, we're active in Italy and Spain, but we're also very active in South America and in North America. And I think, as Cédric was saying, I think I'm a bit also surprised, because also as a group, we do see the challenges, but we also see the opportunities. And so in that sense, I will not discuss whether 90, 85, I mean, obviously the number is an issue, but the direction is quite straightforward, and investors are moving in that direction. And it's important to really distinguish whether we're talking about adjusting the rate of decarbonization or inverting and stalling the effort. So I think it's very important that maybe my first question to the panelists would be, we're talking about reducing the rate of decarbonization, or actually questioning it? Because it's very important in the public debate to be clear about what the issues that you're pointing out is. My second question is, I didn't hear too much talk about the energy security challenge. I think the recent increase in ambition that actually brought the Commission to propose a target, that it is very ambitious. I think for the electricity sector, we can do our part, but obviously for industry is a different challenge. But I will be very curious to get insights on how you're incorporating energy security concerns in your macroeconomic simulations. Because again, the recent increase came after the gas crisis that we had in Europe due to the Russian conflict. And today, if I look at what's happening in Qatar, in the Middle East, I don't feel so comfortable with some of the diversification that we were foreseeing with the Middle East. The same thing if I look at across the ocean, might go to the US, we're talking about importing LNG, but it's also true that the US administration is proving very unstable. And North Africa, again, we were looking at North Africa is also, we see what's going on in Libya. So my direct question is, are you incorporating in your economic modeling and thinking the energy security side, or are you maybe just focusing too much on the climate benefits, but not looking at the wider picture? That's my second question. And again, as Cedric was saying, to Carraro, it's true, we've been working on CCS for 20 years, and the oil and gas industry has been promising drastic cost reductions. What happened? What happened there? Why is it stalling completely? Thank you very much. Again, very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Cedric, Jan. A couple of other things that I think would be interesting is, in the end, it's maybe not economics, macroeconomics, or economics, but the question that I had a board member always ask me, he was a Brazilian, and he said, God's 11th commandment is who pays the bill? Somebody pays the bill. And I think, Christian, you refer to the fact that, somebody has to pay the bill. The government has been paying it so far. Is there, if you want to do it and be the leader, in the end, somebody's going to pay for this. So how do we manage that? The second thing is, if that is the case, what is the mix of tools that we have? So we have the CBAM, we have export side measures, we have restructuring. But in the end, all these measures that we discussed, that we put in place so far, are on the supply side. At least the way I interpret it, all the measures are encouraging the supply side of low carbon products. And is that inevitable that some measures are going to have to be put in place to deal with a demand side? Now, whether it's a mandate or is it carbon standards or something, but it's obvious that they are producing low carbon products, so they are producible in some way, but the market is not there. I remember speaking to a Japanese company, say, well, Markus-san, I will buy low carbon steel if I have to, but I don't have to. So let me go I think we've got another 12 minutes or so. So I'd like to go back to the panelists, if I may, and I'll go to in the same order with Carlo, Clemens, Christian, and Terhi. And then if there are any other things that we want to add at the end, but let's start with Carlo. So the questions, I've added a few questions, Carlo.
Yeah, I'll try to address the few questions. From Jan is, do we forget that for many technology, green technology, we know how they perform, and we know that the price is going to be lower, and it has been lower and lower in the last 10 years. And this is a big change. The last decade is characterized as the huge change in the pricing of these technologies. Fine, but this is exactly what makes a sort of 80% target achievable at low cost. This is exactly what the advisory board says. It's the additional step, the enhanced target that worries me. So we're not talking about getting rid of the transition or making big changes on the transition. It's fundamental, it's crucial, and it provides economic benefits. But we need to probably slow it down, or at least from an economic viewpoint, it would be wise to slow it down. If there are other reasons, political or strategic reason to move more quickly, fine, I understand. And certainly security reasons are very important to move quickly with the transition. And there are many others, including political reasons and relationship with developing countries. All this is fine. But from a strictly economic viewpoint, the additional effort for a minus 90% with respect to the linear trend, which is achievable, thanks to what Jan was saying about new technology, I think that additional effort is not justified economically. It's justified by other reasons.
Clemens, I think there were quite a few questions, and again, in the end, what is the mix of and who pays the bill, and how do we move forward? It's not about changing the direction of work of travel, but is it about front loading?
Thank you, Andre. Now, I do think one cannot emphasize enough that there is a strong, let's say, collective interest of making progress at the international level in fighting climate change. And I think it's important to think about European policies in that framework. Now, who pays the bill? I think Carlo mentioned that the member states, at least many of the important member states, have very high levels of debt. And one option indeed could be to finance more at the European level. But we shouldn't forget the EU consists of the member states. So EU debt needs to be serviced by the member states. So there's no independent institution. Of course, many people said, yes, Germany is not yet entirely bankrupt, but we are moving towards it. We are now taking on a lot of debt, as you've heard, for defense and for infrastructure. So it's not really going into infrastructure. Most of it is going into consumption because we have deficits in our health systems as other countries do. The idea that the EU is like an independent entity with deep pockets, I think is just misleading. So, if we increase government debt at the EU level, it'll have to be serviced by the member states. And, apart from the political question, whether there can be agreement, my view is there won't. It'll be difficult, and we know that if we think about the defense spending, for instance, some money has been mobilized at the EU for defense purposes, and there will be other issues. So I think who pays the bill is really a key question. Are we really willing to mobilize a lot of money? About the international context, I think it's maybe also important to say a few words about carbon border adjustment, CBAM. I agree with Christian's point. It's a good idea, but if you think about it, if we really want to protect European competitiveness, the logic has to follow that of the value-added tax. So especially, we would have to exempt exports. That's a debate now in the EU, but it would mean we need to say goodbye to the idea that we will be climate neutral as a continent. What we can do is decarbonize consumption, but not production. Because as soon as we try to decarbonize production, including exports, we are losing competitiveness on the export side. So carbon border exchange is a nice idea, but it will only take us so far. By the way, now as we begin it, focusing on intermediate products, we will see the downstream industries coming under pressure. So I think we're not organizing it very well. So in the end, we will need something on the export side. So, this entire thing remains challenging. Final point, maybe it's not so good to get bogged down on this 90% or 80% question because the emissions are endogenous anyway. Maybe it's more important to talk about the instrument level. And I think, yes, there are some positive developments like integrating transport and buildings into the ETS. I think that's a very important step. How quickly can we wind down ETS quantities? I don't know. That's now the ambition question, but getting the instrument right is something we may all agree on.
Christian.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Two things on what Clement just said. First, I fully agree with him that the CBAM, to be efficient, should also include rebate for exporters. That makes a lot of sense. Second, on the instrument, indeed, that's crucial. And I'm in favor of a mixed system, not a price or a quantity, but a mixed system where we have an ETS market with a mean and a max price on which the union would be committed. That would increase the ceiling, and the floor would increase at some predetermined rate. So going to the comments and question of the three participants, I I observe in particular that Cedric and Jan were supportive of a more techno-solutionist approach, where we could wait for those technological improvement for getting marginal abatement costs down in the future. That would make the target of 90% more feasible or more socially acceptable. That may be possible, indeed. It may be true that those technologies will improve so fast through learning by doing or through R&D. That may be possible, but we cannot be certain of that. And the current cost, I mean, remember, we already taken away the low-hanging fruits. Now, cement, steel, mobility are much harder to, my understanding, are much harder to decarbonize. So we need to take into account this uncertainty and take action now under uncertainty. We cannot wait to have those industries getting those cheap technologies for decarbonization. We have to make it now. We cannot wait. So that's a challenge. How do we face this uncertainty? Let me also mention that I'm always surprised by those lobbyists, not mentioning the debate here, but more generally. We have lobbyists saying, we will do the job, don't worry, the costs are going down, just help us subsidize the green R&D, and that's something I think should be important. But it's very rare that I hear about the expected marginal abatement costs. What will be, suppose the technology will emerge, what will be the margin, what will be the cost per ton of CO2 saved in the cement industry, in the steel industry? It's very hard to get those numbers, and that's make the debate quite difficult to determine who among the techno-solutionists or the degrowth people are correct. So let me call here for more efforts to make more transparent what will be the expected abatement cost of those different industries by the year 2040, and that could be very helpful to determine as soon as possible whether this objective of 90% is feasible, cost-effective or not. And let me finish with just mentioning that last week this book came out in the library. I'm sorry it's in French, but it would be a nice extension of this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Christian. That certainly will make a very interesting reading. I will call upon Terry, and then Michael and I will conclude this conversation. It's very interesting. I think, Terry, one thing that I remember from Copenhagen was that we made, we meaning the EU, I'm not me, but the EU has made this conditional upon what other people will do. And well, we weren't terribly successful, but okay. Now, there are many assumptions that we make here in terms of hydrogen and in terms of rate of electrification. There's a lot of things that come into the assumptions for the impact assessment. I don't know if you want to make any comment at the end, but other than that, feel free to respond to the questions and any other things that your colleagues have mentioned.
Thank you, Andre. I will not come back to the conditional. I think it wasn't a success, like you say. If I just a few comments on what has been discussed, I think on the governments paying for the transition and the climate action, I would also tend to disagree and think that ETS has played a very important role, and it has also helped us maybe discover greenhouse gas reductions that were much easier or cheaper than that we thought. There was a mention by Clemens of the business model that there isn't, for some of these, maybe it's low carbon cement or steel, there isn't a business model, and I think this is very important. And this is something that the Commission also identified in the Clean Industrial Deal and is intending to come forward with proposals to deal with lead markets and make it help with the business model for these technologies. And then just to come back on the question, what are we losing if we go for 85%? Well, I think we are losing on early adoption of some of the technologies, and perhaps also then leads and export markets, and creating the employment and added value coming from that. We might be losing if we're not accelerating our climate action, but a little bit more wait and see. We might be also losing on the energy security aspects. Like I said, it has been recognized we are dependent on imports when it comes to fossil fuels. I think there are many. Maybe in the country that I know best, this is more natural to be very keenly interested in energy independence, but I think this is an important value also for others. And of course, we lose the link with climate science. I think it's important that we stay true to our commitment to pursue measures to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and this is where our 90% target, I think, just passes the mark. Thank you.
Mike, any thoughts, and then I'll conclude from your side. Michael, you have to tell you that Michael is somewhere in Asia, so he's many hours away.
Yes, and I know some countries in Asia were mentioned, and indeed a lot is happening in Asia. No, we're at time, so I'll be very quick. I think, clearly we didn't expect this panel to answer all the questions, so the debate will continue. And I think it's also noteworthy that nobody said that we have to stop and roll backwards, right, on the energy transition. That's clearly not the message. But there were voices of concern about the timeline and the level of decarbonization. And there's somewhat linked to assumptions made, and also, of course, conditions on technology cost declines, conditions on the global context. That latter point, I think, was really something that resonated a lot, certainly resonates with me. So the debate's not over. I'm sure we'll be reconvening in a similar setting a few years down the road, and I look forward to that, and thank all the panelists.
Well, I also want to thank all of you. I know my illusion of getting everybody in Brussels for that face-to-face discussion kind of evaporated very rapidly, because I know how difficult it is to get one of you in Brussels for a certain time. So I'm grateful that we can get you all on this. I come back to my kitchen question, and again, it belongs to a Brazilian from one of the big Brazilian companies who was on the AIRA board many years ago, is who pays the bill? Because somebody has to pay, and I think that as long as we're realistic and we're clear and we're honest about it, I think that is a much easier thing to discuss. But it is, somebody will have to pay, and there is blood, sweat, and tears that come at the end of this. There's win-wins, but there's also effort that has to come into this. The tools, and as Michael has mentioned, is not an issue of reversing. The question is, what is the speed with which you go, and whether this is dependent on what happened in the rest of the world. So these are continuous discussion. We are amateur economists. We are dealing with some very serious economists here on the screen, and we're very grateful to all of you for having taken the time. And we hope that we will have the opportunity to renew this conversation. As Terry has said at the beginning, I think this is not a decision that's going to be made this week. It's going to be a decision that we probably postpone for a while. So yet we may have yet another kick at the can, as they say. So thank you again very much, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.